My name is Brian Schneiro. I've been an engineer here for the last 5.5 years or so now, but I know that is not why you all came here today. You certainly didn't come to see me. So a few months ago, I was on a plane, and I just happened to be sitting next to this person who started talking about drug policy and how it affects society and some of the implications of that. And I found the talk absolutely fascinating. In fact, we talked, I think, almost the entire flight, which was about an hour or so. What was even more interesting was his credentials. He was a 33-year veteran of law enforcement and the executive director of a group called Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. So, of course, at the end of the flight, I asked him if he'd like to come here to Google and give a talk on the topic, and he agreed. So, with me today is Neill Franklin, the executive director of LEAP. So, come on.
First of all, I want to thank Brian, and I'm impressed by Brian. I mean, what he has done to promote this and get this moving for us here at Google. I can give you thanks for that. And also, you might want to thank him. He supplied a wonderful lunch for you guys. I see that. Way to go, Brian. That's a way to get him here. He didn't tell me that I would be a little overdressed for the occasion. But I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to loosen up a little bit. How's that? Is that better? All right. We're going to get there. See, my wife, she gets a little upset when I don't loosen my tie at night when I go to bed. You know, it's not like she's trying to get me to wear these things called pajamas or something like that. But after so many years in law enforcement, mainly for me in criminal or narcotics investigation, I agree when I was in narcotics investigation, I used to dress a little bit more relaxed and looked a little different. But once I started going up through the ranks, which I'll talk about just a little bit about, the costume changed. So I'm kind of used to this, but I'll get over it. Real quick, I want to give you a brief overview of our organization, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and just a little bit of my background, as Brian touched upon. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. Law Enforcement Against Prohibition was formed in 2002 by 5 cops, retired cops. Jack Cole was one of those 5, and he was my predecessor as executive director for Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. I took over in July. And Jack Cole, retired New Jersey State Trooper, did a lot of time in narcotics work for the New Jersey State Police, and it was into a lot of very interesting cases. But they had the forward thinking and the courage. See, because it was their forward thinking that brought them to the place of realizing that there's something really wrong with our drug policies in this country. You know, after 3 decades of no successes and being there on the front lines, they realized that something's not right. It's not what we thought it would be. So they formed LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and we're thousands. We have probably around 35,000 supporters now worldwide. We're based here in the United States, but we're in 78 countries, probably more than 78 countries now. And not just cops. We have judges, retired federal judges. We have prosecutors. We have corrections officials. We have a current warden of a prison who is on board with us. And we have a speakers bureau of over 100 members who travel around to educate. To educate. I like that effect. That's neat stuff. Should I expect any less from Google? But so that's what we do. We teach people about our failed policies. We teach about what occurs on the front lines. So that's a snapshot of LEAP. And oh, can't forget this. We are completely nonprofit, 501(c). So if you guys want to help us out to continue our message, please feel free. And I can give you a little bit more information on that. But that's our website, leap.cc, leap.cc. And to make it easier to remember, another way to get there is copssaylegalizedrugs.com. And that will get your attention. So, now about me. As Brian said, a little over 33 years in the business of law enforcement. And just so, make sure I was clear, our organization says we must legalize all drugs in order to solve our issues, not just in this country, but worldwide. And those issues I will be talking about today. Now, when you hear that word legalize, don't fall out of your seat. We're not talking about a free-for-all. We're not talking about like how you guys get lunch here at Google. I do like it, though. But we're talking about regulation and control. We're talking about taking complete control away from the criminals and making sure that it is regulated and controlled in a responsible manner. Okay, my 33 years, I started with the Maryland State Police back in the late 1970s. A couple years after I joined the state police, I became an undercover narcotics agent. Worked primarily around the Washington, D.C. area. From there, I eventually worked my way into management, eventually commanding a number of task forces in the western part of the state, multi-jurisdictional drug task forces. I think I had about 7 during that time as a lieutenant with the Maryland State Police. Shortly thereafter, I became a regional commander for both narcotics and criminal investigation. I then had the northeast part of the state. The state was divided in half, so I had about 12 counties under my command, and of that, I think there was probably about 12 different task forces. From there, I went to become the commander of training for the Maryland State Police, which was one of the 2 largest training academies divisions within law enforcement in the state of Maryland. I then retired from there in 1999. From there, I went to Baltimore. I was recruited to go to Baltimore, which was my hometown. I then commanded their training division, which was the largest training division in the state. I did that for 4 years. Before leaving there and going to my third, so I had a problem. I couldn't keep a job. But I got over that. I think I'm at my last stop now. So I went to the Maryland Transit Administration to command their detective bureau, their criminal investigations bureau. During that time, I also had the privilege to be the chairperson for a grassroots organization in Harford County, Maryland, which was called the Heroin Narcotics Task Force. Now, no, it wasn't cops. It was community. It was formed by 2 moms that had lost their 2 sons to heroin overdoses. They were high school students. And they were trying to get funding for treatment and education. And it's a difficult task, very difficult task. So it got me to see from another perspective this issue that we're talking about here today. I've been involved with mentoring children throughout the years, and also the president for an organization on a board for an organization called Turnaround Incorporated, which was an organization in the Baltimore area for domestic violence. We're advocates for domestic violence, child sexual abuse, sexual assault, and it gave you, and you'll be surprised how this also spills over into that realm as well. You guys seen the HBO series The Wire? I'll make one quick comment about that. Except for the community of Amsterdam, it's right on. Right on. And many of those characters and scenes and scenarios that you would see in that were really taken from true life over a span of maybe a couple of decades, and they pushed it all together. Okay, real quick, I got a question. I assume that most of the people, or not all of you here, are familiar with our drug policies in the country, right? For the most part, marijuana, heroin, cocaine, that stuff's illegal, right? To possess and so on. Just by a show of hands, how many of you think that our current policies are working? Don't be bashful. I mean, you're among friends. One, two, anybody? Okay. And just for the record, I didn't see a single hand go up. And there's probably about 150, 60 people in this room here. I asked that question for a reason, and as you'll see as we move through the program. So let's go ahead and move through I got a little slideshow here that we're gonna roll through real quick. Before 1914, heroin. Let me use this so I can move around a little bit. Is this good? Okay. So before 1914, heroin could be bought from any grocery store, and that's true before the Harrison Act. But then we in this country decided to start with our drug laws. And back then, 1.3% of our population was addicted to drugs. Okay? That's when drugs were legal. And I talked a little bit about my career, but this is just some visuals. That's a good-looking guy there. And this guy standing next to me, that's my brother. He's the reason I got into law enforcement. And he was my instructor. That's when I graduated from the police academy. He was my instructor in the police academy. I can tell you some stories there, but there he is again. So that's when I went to another agency. That's when I went to Baltimore. I was a colonel there, and he was a colonel with the Transportation Authority after he left the state police. I had to encourage him to retire and move on. Still with Baltimore. And that's what happens when you start talking about this stuff. That was the end of my career with my last agency. But they couldn't find anything, so I was set free eventually. So from 1979 to 2009. And, you know, I mentioned this span because, as you'll see, we'll be talking about, you know, we're talking about the past 3 to 4 decades. And, you know, and that's 3 decades for me. And war on drugs started a few years before that. 1970. Oh, my God. So 1.3%. You just remember seeing that figure again? Okay, 1.3% in 1970. People were addicted to drugs. So we went through quite a few decades and still at that same percentage. 1970, now we're talking about deaths as a result of our drug culture. But in 1970, less likely than falling downstairs than to die from using drugs. Okay? I mean, less likely to die from using drugs than falling downstairs. Falling downstairs is more dangerous, so stay off the stairs. Use the elevator. Same thing with choking on food. So it's not like the propaganda that has been put out there over the years that drugs are dangerous, they're going to kill you, blah, 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 blah. Many more things in this world that are going to kill you, believe me. Stay away. I was going to name a particular restaurant, but I don't want to be sued for slander. So, but you know where I was going with that. There are many of them. 1970 soft drugs. Back then, hard drugs were virtually unheard of. And I'm going to start rolling through these slides real quick because I think it's very important to get some good dialogue going, but I want to give you guys a good foundation for, you know, what this is all about, touch on a few areas, so I'm going to be clicking through rather quickly as we get going. Now, here is from the DEA briefing book of 2001, and a lot of the stuff that we use from the feds, you'll see, you know, goes back a few years, but it's very hard to get current information, statistics from the federal government, and I don't know why that is, but so be it. But if you look at the two charts here, on the left, price, on the right, purity. And down the center, we have years, beginning with 1980 going through 1999. And we're referring to, if you look in the upper left, I'll say it's $3.90. And we refer to, as we're talking about heroin here, we refer to that as a trade because back then, that amount, that's what it cost, $3, about $3. And these adjustments that you're going to see, inflation is included in that. It's factored into that, so that we get a good comparison as how prices change as we navigate through the years. So on the purity side in 1980s, 3.6% purity for heroin when you bought heroin off the street back then. 1970 was about, when you compare the prices, it was about $6 for the same amount of heroin. You can see in 1980 it was $3.90. If you go back 10 years, it was about $6.37. So you can see that the price in those 10 years went down for buying the same amount of heroin. Purity back in 1970 was 1.5%, so you see the purity had gone up considerably. What I'm talking about here is supply and demand. What I'm talking about here is, if we're doing what we're supposed to do as it relates to the war on drugs, to reduce the amount of drugs coming into the country, the availability, first of all, if less drugs were coming into the country, purity level would either stay the same or it would become less, because they cut it more. They would cut it more. But if more drugs are coming into the country, then your purity is going to go up. It's going to increase. Same thing when you compare gasoline. When there's plenty of gasoline, prices do what? They go down. Limited supply, price goes up. And I have somebody who will probably talk a little bit about that as we move forward. So when you look at the purity in 399, I'm going to move forward real quick. I'm going to move up to 1999. That same amount of heroin in 1999 was now under $1 at 80 cents. Purity level, 38%. Today, heroin purity is extremely high. It's in some places it's almost pure, because we have not been effective in keeping drugs out of our country. And I think after 4 decades of that trend, it's pretty obvious that we're not going to be. So just wanted to touch on that real quick. All right. Drug users, according to the DEA, 1965, 4 million. 2% of that population. In 2003, 112 million. 46% of that population. Money spent fighting the drug war. Okay, since 1970, we spent 100 million. 2003, 70 billion. Okay, this is what we're doing in the law enforcement effort. And I saw that during my span of career as we continued to buy more toys and spend more money, put more people into our narcotics units, going from like 10 and 15 people in a unit back in the 1970s all the way up to a few hundred in the late 80s. Drug seizures. Back in the 70s when I first came on and I started working undercover, when I seized an ounce of cocaine, man, I was big time. I got all the pats on the back, and it was big. It was a big deal. Ounce of heroin, oh my God. Big stuff. Quarter ounce of heroin. In 2002, if you wanted a good pat on the back, you needed 10 tons of heroin. Yeah, we winning that war, no doubt about it. How about 20 tons of cocaine? So now you're talking a container load at the port. And that's the truth. Once again, it shows that it's still coming in quite a bit. Wholesale cocaine costs, 60% less. Wholesale heroin costs, 70% less. Prices are going down, just like I was talking about with gasoline, supply and demand. It's here. Let's talk about overdoses per 100,000 users. In 1979, that was the year that I graduated from the State Police Academy. We were at 28 deaths per 100,000. Look at that, 141 deaths by 2000. So we're not saving lives over these decades. That's for sure. Here's just a quick chart on marijuana arrest versus total drug arrests in the U.S. from 1970 up till 2005. Down at the bottom, see we're arresting 500,000 people in 1970. Quadrupled. 2005, 1.9 million total drug arrests. 44%, 89% increase in marijuana possession arrests. Crazy. We're filling up our jails, and that's also costing us money to the tune of 30-something thousand, depending on where you are. Some average around $29,000, $30,000 per inmate per year. Sounds like a college education. That's not what they're getting. They're coming out better criminals. So they think. Okay, U.S. tax dollars spent on prosecuting drug war. We spent over $1 trillion, folks. Here's your health care program. And there's just a graph that talks about arrests of nonviolent drug offenders in the millions and how it's gone up from 1970 to 2006. I'll move into the actual numbers. 39 million arrests, drug arrests. And most of these arrests I'm talking about, folks, are nonviolent. I'm not talking about the folks out here shooting and killing people. 2002% of the population addicted. Dang, we're still at 1.3. Man. Figure with all these drugs and stuff in the country would go up to about what? I don't know, 10, 12%. 1.3, just like back in 1914. So, and that's what I was just talking about. When it was legal, when drugs were illegal, after 40 years, we're still around the same percentage. So, this is interesting. Percent of crimes cleared by arrest, exceptional means. What this is information from our U.S. Department of Justice as it relates to across the country, how many crimes we're solving. Okay, murder, rape, robbery, all those real crimes against people. 2006, as you can see, murder, clearance rate, 60.7. Rape, 40.9. Robbery, 25.2. We are now have unsolved out here. 40% of our murders go unsolved. 60% of our rapes and arsons go unsolved. 75% of robberies go unsolved. Now, when they go unsolved, these people continue to prey upon you. That's what happens when you don't solve crimes. 83% of property crimes. In 1963, we solved 91% of our murders. Today, like I said, 61%. We're focusing a lot of our energy on our drug policies and enforcing drug laws in our neighborhoods and communities. So, 30% fewer. Chasing nonviolent drug users. That's what I was just talking about. Protect us from important people. Now, as we get into the violence here, how did I come to where I'm at? This is how I came to where I'm at. It's the violence in the illegal drug trade that really gets to me. I know there's money involved. I know that we're losing money from taxes, not changing our policy, but this is what gets me. In 2000, right after I retired from the state police and went to Baltimore City, I got a phone call in the middle of the night about a trooper who had been shot. And it was this guy, Ed Totley, who was a good friend of mine. And Ed had worked for me on many times, but more importantly, he was and still is a friend. So in case you can't see that, he was making an undercover buy in the Washington, D.C. area from a drug dealer while working with the FBI. And they were surveilling all of this. I mean, they were right down the street. This was cameras in the car and everything. Guy comes back out and shoots Ed point blank range in the head to keep the money and the drugs. Guy gets away and goes to New York, but we eventually caught him. So now his wife and 3 kids are alone as it relates to that relationship. But it didn't stop with Ed. there are many police officers that have met the same fate as my friend. And it continues, and it continues. But it's not just us out there on the front lines who are dying. A couple years later in Baltimore, in his corner row home, this is where that family lived on Preston Street in Baltimore. This is the Dawson family. That's the mom up there, Angela, and 5 kids. The husband, there's no photo of the husband here, but he was also in that home on that night when the neighborhood drug dealer set their home on fire. Because she was working with the police to get him off of that corner so her kids didn't have to deal with him. So he murdered them. See, it's not just Mexico. We're in Mexico. We, over the past, since 2006, have had more than 28,000 Latinos murdered. Not because we have a drug abuse problem in this world, because we have drug prohibition, which creates an illegal market, just like back in the 1920s with Al Capone and alcohol here in the United States. It does the same thing. We've taken a problem and made it 10 times worse by invoking prohibition. All right. School children report it's easier to buy illegal drugs, marijuana, than it is alcohol and beer, because alcohol and beer is regulated. And when a kid comes up to me on the street and says, "Hey man, can you go in the store and get me a 6-pack?" I say, "You done lost your mind." But when he walks up to a drug dealer on a corner or sends a text message, all they want to see is his money. They don't want to see a driver's license. And as we've already seen, the drugs are increasing. The amounts are increasing every year. It's becoming more difficult for the cartel to transport it across the border, so now they're growing it in our national parks. And are guarding it with, they have guards up in the trees with AK-47s. Just ask any DEA agent, he'll tell you. That's what the illegal trade generates, $500 billion every year. It's more than that, but we lowball it. That's a mere $255 million. That's in the room of a drug dealer's house. Probably too much for the bank vault to handle. $500 billion would cover a room 2,000 times that size. Check this out. They don't count their money. They weigh their money. Seriously, they weigh it. I mean, you saw how much money it was. They weigh it. And if you can't see that, $100 bills, 37.1 pounds equal $1 million. You might want to weigh your money one day. That's why we're telling you that. If you're not already weighing it. All right. So remove the profit motive. You remove the profit motive. You remove the violence. All right. That's plain and simple. After doing this for almost 40 years, believe me, I know. That's what it's all about out there in the street. So you end prohibition. How you end prohibition, you legalize drugs. You regulate and control it. That's how you get the profit margin out of it for these guys. Let's talk a little bit about decriminalizing. Now, there's a difference. To decriminalize, that helps the people who are possessing. Okay, so if you have a small amount or whatever it is, you don't go to jail. That's a good thing. But it doesn't take the violence out of the business, because the dealers are still out there, the cartel is still out there. Now, they decriminalized in the Netherlands in 1976, Portugal in 2001. And in Portugal, and this is for all drugs, not just marijuana or whatever, it's heroin, cocaine, and what have you. Mexico, 2009. A lot of people don't know that they did that in Mexico. Argentina in 2009. But once again, they didn't take the full step to legalize. They only took half a step. That's why they still have the violence in Mexico. You still have your dealers. You still have the illegal underground market. Okay, so won't legalization cause everyone to use drugs? What do you think? Will it? Question. Of the 160 some odd folks of you sitting in this room today and you that are watching over the net, how many of you would use heroin, cocaine, crystal meth tomorrow if it were illegal. I mean, if it were legal. Tomorrow it's legal. You can go out here and buy it from a safe place, and so how many of you would use it? Remember, I said you're among friends. Not only that, of the people you know, and I assume that you know people, right? You like Facebook and tweet, you tweet and all that stuff. And okay, of those people you know, how many of those people do you know that would use it tomorrow? If you know any that would use it tomorrow, they're probably already doing it. You get my point? But the good thing about it, if we were to legalize it tomorrow, at least you or those who do use and currently buy, they don't have to go out into that dangerous market like you saw in the HBO series, The Wire. You don't have to go out into that market and buy it. Additionally, you would know what you're getting because just like with alcohol, you know what the alcohol content is. It says it right on the bottle. There are certain standards. There's certain things they can and can't put in it. The purity level. So for someone who's using heroin, because if I'm using heroin, I buy illegally from you today. I'm not saying that you do that. But if I buy from you today, you might be selling me something at 30% purity. But you probably don't even know what your purity level. I mean, you just mix it up. But if you're going tomorrow because the police lock you up, then I got to buy from you. You might be selling yours at 80%. Next thing I know, I'm in shock trauma. Well, if someone gets me help, because because when you OD, people just don't run and get you help, especially if they've been hanging out with you. They make 40, 50 phone calls first, try to figure out what to do before they get you, if they get you medical attention, because you're a criminal. That would make me a criminal. I don't want to go to jail, even if it involves saving your life. That's a problem. That's why we have so many overdoses. In the Netherlands, talking about if drugs were legal, in the Netherlands, where you can now use at your marijuana at your little coffee shops and so on, marijuana used by 10th graders, 28%. Marijuana used by 10th graders in the United States, 41%. Blows that out of the water. All right. Lifetime prevalence in the U.S. and in the Netherlands. USA, 37%. Netherlands, 17%. They've made it boring to use pot. Old people use pot. Heroin use lifetime. USA, 1.4%. Netherlands, 0.4%. It's a different mindset. Homicide rate in the Netherlands. USA, 5.6. Netherlands, 1.5. Portugal. Drugs used by 13 to 15-year-olds decreased by 25% because in Portugal, the Cato Institute, in case you want to look into this more, Cato Institute did a study on that. You can find it online. In Portugal, drug use 16 to 19-year-olds decreased by 22%. Heroin overdose deaths, because now it's okay to go get help. And not only that, there's more money available for treatment and education, decreased by 52%. Portugal, HIV infections, new cases of HIV infections, decreased by 71%. Check that out. That's saving lives. Mexico. I'm going to skip right through these because it's not much there, but this talks about in Mexico and then I think Argentina, police corruption. And let me touch on this real quick. Police corruption. Yeah, we have it in the United States here. It's profitable. Everybody likes to make money, no matter what you do, whether you wear the uniform or not. Now, the cases are few, but yeah, we have cops, we have prosecutors, we have other people who take bribes, who rip off drug dealers, who do whatever they got to do despite the uniform they wear to make money. Okay, it's profitable. And they take bribes, and they give passes to drug dealers and so on. It's different in Mexico. In Mexico, first we offer you the money. You don't want to take the money, next we offer you a bullet. And we offer your family members a bullet. So if you don't take the money, believe me, you'll take the second option. And you'll do whatever they want you to do because they will kill your family. Okay. Are we on time? Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about incarceration rates because this is important. And this is per 100,000, starting with European nations, per population 100,000. They are at or below in Europe 150 per 100,000 incarceration. The United States, by March of 2008, try 1,009. We lock up a lot of people, more than anybody else in the world, including China. Who wants to live in China? Who wants to? Okay, but you know, you've probably been there before. You know where to go. No, but seriously, yeah. No, I'm not, making fun of China or anything like that. It's just, I'm talking about how our country is supposed to have this wonderful constitution and freedoms and what have you. You know what I'm talking about. Those protections from unreasonable search and seizure. I can't go down that road right now because we'll be all day. But we have issues there in this country. Federal prisoners from 1970 to 2005, okay? The yellow are for non-drug offenses. And you see they start low, but they only come up to about right here. The red for drug offenders. So in 1970, you can hardly see it. But then it starts on this path, and then we really get into the drug war, and it's off the roof. Way up there above 240-something% by the year 2004, 2005. So you can see it's greatly outpaced other crimes. Yeah, it went up for other crimes as we continue to put people in prison for other crimes, but for drug offenses, off the roof. And there are a number of reasons for that. A lot of, but money is one of them. The grants and things that law enforcement agencies get from the federal government for focusing upon drug arrest. And there are other reasons too. And these are just the numbers in relation to the actual chart so that you can see how that increased for regular arrest for non-drug, it increased 294%, but for drug-related arrest, it increased 2,558%. So those are the actual numbers correlate to that. And starting at the top, we have Denmark, and we work our way down through Turkey, Georgia, Greece, the UK, and what have you. The United States, of course, is the one with the bar all the way over here as it relates to people we imprison per 100,000. So, as you can see, we outpace everybody. Here's Russia, of course, in the United States. Yeah. Anyway, let's move through that. I think you get the picture as far as how we put people in prison. There's also a disparity issue, and I'll touch on that real quick. But who uses drugs? And before I get to that disparity issue, just talk about who uses drugs. And these are, we get these figures, majority of our figures from the U.S. Department of Justice, from the feds. Whites constitute for 72% of all drug users in the U.S. Blacks constitute for 13.5% of all drug users in the U.S. Who gets arrested? 37% of those arrested for drug violations are black. Who goes to prison? 60% of those in state prisons for drug felonies are black. 81% in federal drug offenders are black. And that's in federal prisons. Blacks are now serving an average of 6 years for their offenses, while whites are serving an average of 4 years. Of the convicted defendants, 33% of whites receive a prison sentence. So when you're convicted, 1/3 go to prison for whites. 51%, that's half, for blacks. A black male born today has a 1 in 3 chance of serving time in prison, of being introduced to the criminal justice system. 1 in 3. So we're talking about disenfranchisement. 14% of black men lost the right to vote, on average. In Texas, that's 31%. Incarceration rates, white males per 100,000 in the United States. 943 white males per 100,000 in the United States, incarceration rate. South Africa, 1993, under apartheid, for black males, that was 851. And we thought that was atrocious. In the United States, under Prohibition in 2008, tried 4,919 per 100,000. There's a book written by Michelle Alexander called The New Jim Crow. If you haven't read it, oh my God, read it. It really breaks this whole thing down. I mean, she did a wonderful job with that. Great book. Educated me on a number of things. Outcome to legalization. Now, 1.9 million less people arrested each year. That's what we'd had. So, you know how costly that is to house 1.9 million people, even if it's just for a month or a few days throughout the year? You know how much money that costs? And when they're in there, they're not paying taxes. I guarantee you. Because they're not working. $70 billion would be saved each year. So, end prohibition. Number two, let's have federal government, and these are just some ideas, have the federal government produce these drugs. Now, this isn't a position of leap. However, this talks a little bit about regulation and control. Some of the things that we could do. That would deal with quality control. We talked a little bit about that, knowing what you're going to be getting if you choose to march down that road. We do not condone the use of drugs in leap. We don't. Drugs are dangerous. Drugs will harm you. They will harm you. But we've just made it 10 times worse by subjecting people to prison. Prohibition. Standardization. Okay, you know what the potency level is. Measurement, potency. Like I said, reduce and end of overdoses. All right. Number three. Sell drugs to adults from the state package stores or whatever models that are out there. Let the states, the individual 50 states, decide on how that's going to be. The feds get out of it and let the states decide how to do it. That's how the Constitution intended it to be in the first place. For those drugs that might be too bad, all right, like they do up in Canada with the Naomi Project for a heroin maintenance program. If you're an addict, you can go in and get what you need so that you're not out stealing. You're not lying to your family members. You're not causing problems in your neighborhood. You're not knocking people over the head to get the money that you need to buy from the illegal drug dealer on a corner. You can take care of your issue without it costing us. And hopefully get your counseling and get off of it. And that's what I was just talking about here in Switzerland. That's what they do in Switzerland and Netherlands and Canada, Germany too, Denmark. Oh, there you go. And under that program, not one overdose death since 1994. How many are we having here in the United States? Once again, it does great as it relates to AIDS and hepatitis because they're no longer out sharing needles. All right, crime was cut by 60%. Oh my God, so many benefits. 82% decline in new heroin cases. Oh my God, we're having so much. It would make such a difference, folks. Redirect the money to, that we save and what we get from taxes, but mainly from what we save to programs of true treatment and education. Then you'll solve the root issue, which is your drug abuse problem. But we can't do it with dumping most of our money into enforcement and filling up our prisons. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work. 30 to 40 years. It hasn't worked. You could do wonders with your education, health care, and housing, job training, employment, livable wages. The list is long of what we could do if we were to turn that corner and head in another direction. Rehabilitation centers. Oh, my God. There you go. All right. Redirect money, save programs. Okay, talk about that. I want to touch on this real quick. 1985, 42% of us smoked tobacco, nicotine, the most addictive drug that's out there. Ask anybody that smokes and is trying to kick the habit. However, by 2003, because we launched this massive program to teach people and to make it uncomfortable for you to smoke in places, Now it's only 21%. You can be effective in reducing use if you just do it the right way. Albert Einstein, we all know what he said. Let me get right to it. But for those who can't read this, the procedure of government has undoubtedly been lowered considerably by the prohibition law. And he's talking about prohibition in general. For nothing is more destructive of respect for the government and a law of the land than passing laws which cannot be enforced. It is an open secret that the dangerous increase of crime in this country is closely connected with this. 40 years, you can't enforce this law properly. Prohibition. And this was a picture from back dealing with alcohol prohibition. Just wanted to say real quick, it was the ladies that came out in full force to reverse the 18th Amendment and repeal it because they wanted to save their children. That's what it was about. And if you want to save your kids today, that's what we have to do. So that's my presentation. I want to bring somebody up real quick, and then we're going to have questions. But I tell you, Robert, why don't you come on up? Robert Leeson is from Australia, and he is over at Stanford, over with the Hoover Institute, right?
And the economics.
And the economics department. And I just met him the other day, and I told him I was having this talk here with you guys, a little discussion and presentation with you guys, and invited him to come along. He is an expert in economics, and he can talk a little bit about economics from a worldwide perspective, from a national perspective here, and I just want to have him here available to answer some questions. And do you want to take just a couple minutes?
Sure. I won't take up too much of your time, just a couple of minutes. That was a very interesting, clear presentation. I just want to add a little bit by way of economics. In other words, what does economics tell us about the war on drugs? Well, I think economics is unambiguous. The income tax, which is what I'm working on at the moment, I'm working on the abolition of the income tax. I want to replace it, as most economists do, with the consumed income tax. The income tax was the gateway drug to prohibition. Why? Because in order to abolish alcohol, you lose an awful lot of revenue. Therefore, you need another source of revenue. The income tax was that source of revenue. Now, we'll see in a minute, when I finish this 2 to 3 minute talk, that by reintegrating drugs into the legal network, we also find ourselves an enormous source of tax revenue. And I'm working at the moment on a method of eliminating income tax, so it fits in nicely with that research project. Okay, so what is the relationship between the war on drugs and the war on terror? One finances the other. Where do the funds come from to kill American soldiers? From the war on drugs. Where do the Taliban get their funds from? The war on drugs. Now, very simple proposition in economics. Total revenue equals price times quantity sold. Why do oil producers form cartels such as OPEC? Very simple reason. If you can form a cartel, dominate the markets, you can do what? Restrict supply. Why? Because if you're dealing with a commodity for which the demand is inelastic, it is in your interest to restrict supply. What happened in 1974, there was a 4-fold increase in the price of oil. Why? Because it's in the interests of OPEC to reduce supply. Likewise, it is in the interests of drug suppliers to reduce supply. So if I was a drug dealer, I would be out there saying, just say no to drugs. Let's get tough on drugs. Let's get serious with this war on drugs. Why? Because it's in my commercial interests, because I'm in the market already. I'm paying off all the cops I need. The last thing I want is new entrants. We want tough laws to keep entrants out, because new entrants will lower the price, lower the revenue. Very simple proposition. So, there's some very simple solutions here. Neill has outlined some. Let me just give you a couple and then I'll finish. In 1974, Turkey, not Afghanistan, was the source of heroin. 94% of heroin was grown in Turkey almost similar, identical proportion to the proportion of heroin that originates from Afghanistan. The Turks decided to do something very radical. They put this to the State Department, and the State Department said, "You bunch of communists, we're not going to tolerate that." What they wanted to do is they wanted to legalize the production of poppies in Turkey. Now, it just so happened that when that great guy Richard Nixon got involved in a little bit of trouble in 1974, I can't remember what it was, perhaps some of you can tell me afterwards, the Turks went ahead and did their plan anyway because the State Department, the American government, was caught up with Watergate. What did they do? They said to Turkish poppy growers, "You can grow whatever you like, any quantity, and guess what? We'll buy it from you." And do you know what happens to that? It's sold as painkillers around the world, a commodity of which we are in tremendous shortage. There's millions and millions of people who are dying painful deaths because we don't have enough painkillers. Now, since 1974, and this is not a research interest of mine, but I have it on good authority, not a single bust of heroin anywhere in the world has been traced back to Turkey. Now, drugs pass through Turkey, but I understand none of the poppies grown in Turkey make their way into the illegal drug market. So there, I think, is probably where I shall stop. If we integrate these dangerous commodities, and drugs are dangerous commodities, back into the legal fabric, we generate an enormous amount of tax revenue. We minimize the damage associated with this, and we destroy funding for the Taliban and their criminal crony friends. Now, if we have got any chance of introducing rational public policy in America, we should start with eliminating this counterproductive, nonsensical war on drugs and use rational thought informed by economic analysis and common sense rather than shallow emotional rhetoric, which is where the war on drugs comes from.
When I met you yesterday, something just told me you would be right for this, so that's why I brought you up. So, we have a couple minutes left over. I doubt it if any of you have any questions or anything, but we'll entertain some. Absolutely, seriously, yes.
Yeah, you don't mind.
If you want to come up, you can. I'd like it.
That's right. I'll yell.
I'll reframe the question.
I have a problem. On the one hand, you make perfect sense, and I agree with you completely. On the other hand, if I were talking to a politician who generally supported a lot of issues I was interested in, I would tell him to run away from this as fast as I could because he couldn't possibly get elected. And I would particularly tell him, don't tell anybody that this is what they do in Europe, because then you really won't get elected. My question is, what can we, what can you, what can your organization do about what I see as an unbelievably massive PR problem where any politician who talks about the legalization of drugs is immediately discounted from the public scene?
Oh, that's a good question. What he asked was, what can you do as citizens, as folks here? Because, well, basically what he said, when a politician wants to talk about this issue, and they call that a third rail issue, you know, like the Metro third electrified rail, if you touch it, you die. It's a third rail issue for politicians, so what can we do? What can you do to get politicians to, I guess, speak to this or to come forward with this? Let me start by saying that politicians are beginning to do it because there are a number of organizations out there, including ours, which has been going to them, and it's becoming, we're getting this more out in the open. The first thing you can do is actually go to our website and just sign on so that we can keep you informed of the good information, all the updates that are coming out, all the propositions that are out there, all the bills that are out there related to this, such as what Senator Jim Webb is doing now in Washington, D.C. As he's taking a good look, he's developing a panel that will take a really good comprehensive look at our entire criminal justice system, and this is a huge part of it. So go to our website, sign on so we can keep you informed and send you information. The second thing is find out, many people don't know who their representatives are. Find out who your representatives are. Then send them emails. Call them and say, hey, I'm in your district. It's okay for you to talk about this because I feel it needs to be talked about. Because as you saw, the first question I asked, how many of you think our current policies are working? No hands went up. And that's what you can say to them. I was at this, forum and this presentation at Google, and they asked a question, how many of you think that our policies are working? And no hands went up. So as my representative, what are you doing to move in a different direction if we out here believe that it's not working? So to talk to them about moving in another direction. Yeah.
There's a very simple answer to that question. It's called tax competition. If drugs are legalized at a local level, a state or even lower level, then income tax and other taxes will fall. Therefore, the logic is you want the war on drugs, you pay for it with higher taxes. And tax competition will eliminate the war on drugs.
Absolutely. From the money perspective. They understand taxes. Yes. How do you lower taxes? Well, the first thing you do is stop spending money. That's the first thing you do. All right? I mean, really, that's balancing your checkbook 101. Stop spending. Evaluate where you're spending your money. And right now we're spending, according to Jeffrey Myron, who's out of Harvard, who's done a lot of studies as it relates to finances in the drug war. I think he puts it at $76.8 billion a year. All right, so we stopped spending that. Robert just talked about the taxes that you can generate from doing it appropriately. And you don't have to start moving forward with all these hard drugs. I mean, marijuana, no one's ever died from ingesting marijuana. I think that's a good place to start. Compare that to alcohol. Maybe people will start using marijuana in lieu of alcohol. And we'll really save some lives. And in, thank you. And in lieu of tobacco, I mean, the list is long. So start there, and I think through taxes, stop spending what we're currently spending, where we're spending it, start letting people, you stop putting people in prison because you got to pay for them, pay for college education, and then they can start contributing to the tax base instead of taking from it. The list is long, and there are a number of studies out there that do speak to this. I would suggest that you go online and Google Jeffrey Myron from Harvard, and you'll see a lot of work that he's done nationally, and he's also begun to break it down state by state. Yes. Well, wouldn't be something I do, but what? Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Here's my suggestion. We're in California, right? There's a proposition out there right now, right? Make a statement, folks. That's where you can begin, because I guarantee you, marijuana put 60 to 70%. You see that big room of money you saw? 60 to 70% of that money for the cartel comes from marijuana. What happens if you take that much revenue from GM or from BP? I like that. But I don't think these guys are going to get bailed out. But that in and of itself would greatly cripple not just the cartel members, but the neighborhood gangs that we have out here. I mean, because it's the same for them as well. That's their biggest, profit margin comes from marijuana. Yes, get you, then I'll come back over here to you, sir.
How do other folks in law enforcement feel about this? Do they find this kind of argument persuasive? And if they don't, what are their...
It depends on where you are, what your job is in law enforcement, who you've talked to, how much knowledge you have. The folks in my circle get it because they listen to what I have to say and they know all the facts surrounding this issue and how it affects your life and everyone else's lives. The higher up you go, the more resistance you find, because the more political that position becomes, the higher up you go in an agency. In some states, like here in California, you're going to see opposition come out like Probably the narcotics union. You know what? I don't have a problem saying it because I was in narcotics, and I can say from firsthand that I liked being in narcotics. Not that I really liked going out and arresting a lot of these people. I found out when I was in narcotics and undercover work, these are really good people. Most of these people I dealt with were really good people. But I enjoyed wearing the shorts, man, and the T-shirts and the sandals and driving a cool car, you know, a Corvette or a 5-liter Mustang or a Mercedes. I didn't want to go back in the uniform pushing a patrol unit. So it's there are incentives, Agencies get a lot of money from the feds. They seize a lot of money in property every year. It's called policing for profit. Another good study done by the Cato Institute. Look that up. Policing for profit. And the list is long. So in my circle, one of the first things I said to the folks in my circle who wear the uniform is, please go back to thinking how you thought when you first came into this line of business, this career, why you came into it in the first place, to be effective in a positive piece of someone's life. Because once they've been on for a while, they become tainted. So I'd get them to go back to think that. And if we change this, police relationships in many communities would improve drastically, because we will no longer be an occupying force in those neighborhoods, searching everyone, searching their homes, searching their cars, profiling issues, and the list is long. So we could repair that and become respected for the most part again. Yes. Yeah.
Well, I was surprised to see government production on your slides. If you mean exclusive government production, then you're no longer talking about legalization of production and distribution, only of consumption. And if you're not talking about exclusive government production, then why should the government be able to compete with private suppliers? I don't understand.
That's just what you saw on the slide was just a suggestion of one possible model. There, we're good.
I think we're on the wrong VC.
Okay. That was just a one possible model that said there's many different models. What we're saying at least is when you move forward, you'll then have 50 states that can work on many different possible models.
But I don't understand what the model is.
Hold on, I want to listen.
I was referring to like the heroin maintenance programs that they currently have in some of the other countries, where where someone doesn't have to pay for what they need to get treatment.
The model you're referring to with that point, exclusive government production or non-exclusive?
I don't know. It's whatever it would be whatever we decided for it to be, but the problem is we don't know what it could possibly be because we have our heads stuck in the sand. We know what we're doing now doesn't work, but we're not moving forward. We're not creating think tanks, serious think tanks, to figure out the new direction. That's the biggest problem we're having right now, is that we're stagnant.
There is a very simple answer. Very simple answer to your question. Gary Becker, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1993, has got a fantastic article in the Journal of Political Economy, published, I think, in 2005, where he demonstrates conclusively that legal producers have lower cost curves than illegal producers, so that it's more efficient, and the illegal producers will be driven out of the market. So it's a complicated argument, it's very mathematical and so on, but have a read of that. I think you'll find the answer to your question there, that illegal producers will be driven out of the market through the inability to compete with legal producers.
That's under the assumption that the government is not the exclusive producer.
Right. I'll take two more questions and then we'll call it. I'm going to take you and then I'll come back to you, sir. Okay. Yeah. Is there a reason why I never mentioned Prop 19? Well, one of the reasons we're a 501(c) and we don't do too much in pushing legislation, changes our tax status. But Prop 19 needs to move forward. In my opinion, it definitely needs to move forward. I think it's critical that it move forward not in 2012, but now. Because I'm telling you, after being on the front lines for over 3 decades, every day that we wait, thousands of people die. And I mean, I'm serious about that. I'm not just talking about here in the United States. I'm talking about worldwide. This is a worldwide issue. Other countries look to us and our policies. We have huge influence over the UN as it relates to drug policy on a worldwide scale. The U.S. needs to move forward, do the right thing, correct our policies and direction so that other countries will follow suit. And we'll save lives. See, and people talk about the unintended consequences of legalization. God, look at the current consequences. You know, they're talking about, oh my God, you know, usage for marijuana may go up 3%. Okay, usage goes up 3%. Smoking marijuana doesn't kill anyone. If we stay where we're at, we'll have another 7,000 people die in the next year. In Mexico, in the United States, we'll probably have about another 10,000 people die in our neighborhood drug wars. And yeah, we'll keep it illegal. I mean, come on. I mean, and those that do become addicted, even if increased usage does go up, at least we would have the money for proper treatment. But I'm telling you right now, as a cop, would much rather take someone off of a street corner to a good treatment center than put them in a body bag and take them to the morgue any day. Any day. And as Jack Cole would say, you can get over an addiction. You'll never get over a conviction. You can't get student loans. You can't get housing. You can't get jobs. And the list goes on and on and on. And what happens to that person? They eventually end up in jail or somehow become draining to society instead of productive in society, all because they decided to use a substance. And yes, sir. There is none. I mean, they tried to say it was related to commerce, but it's not. It's up to the states to decide what this should be. See, back when they did alcohol prohibition, that's why they had to create the 18th Amendment. It had to be a constitutional change for them to do that. So now there are some studies that you can read that speak specifically to that, and I don't want to speak incorrectly because, you know, once again, my area is law enforcement, and now you're getting more into the economic part of it and constitutional law. I can speak to constitutional law as it relates to those, like the Fourth Amendment and Fifth Amendment, dealing with law enforcement and policing, but not as it relates to interstate commerce and all that good stuff. But you can find that information as to what the government is saying the reason is for. So. It just seems, wouldn't it be maybe simpler to launch a challenge to the Supreme Court? Well, and that's one of the things that I know it's not the United States, but in Argentina, that's what they did. They ruled it as unconstitutional. And you ask anybody that deals with constitutional law, and they'll tell you that it is, in this country, it is unconstitutional. But there was something that they did or said that kind of like skirts, you know, kind of like skirts the edges of it. And that's one of the problems we're having. That's with this drug policy that we have. It affects so many other areas of the Constitution. I mean, we're ripping the Fourth Amendment to shreds out here as it relates to searching people. And in many cases, the Supreme Court is holding up some of these searches that are done by law enforcement folks out here in the streets. And when you look at these cases, and that's why, as a matter of fact, what we're talking about right now, and I think it also answers your question, is in the book that I mentioned by Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow, speaks specifically to that. So you might want to take a look at that too. So I know it kind of ran out of time here, but I just want to thank you guys for having me here today, hosting me here today. I had a great time. Thank you. There are some pamphlets on the back there, and I'll give you my, and you can probably find it on the website, but I'll give you my email address as well if you want to communicate with me later. It's pretty simple. It's Neill, Neill, at leap.cc. Thank you.